snaking out the grass. One with your fakeness in the right body. One with your fakeness in the right back. Then we thought was a friend and we like it like that. Coming on my life like snaking out the grass. One with your fakeness in the right back.
Well, I don't have time to beef. Lucky for you, my friend. I in a good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes right up to the limits. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes ain't cast in a minute. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My friend and them couldn't tell you about me. Good people, it's good people. We only want love and we so good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My family couldn't tell you about me. Good people, it's good people. We only on love. Well, every man make their choices. I said we make sacrifices. We block out the noises. We have to forget the voices. One day we gon' make it. We don't have to fake it. I give you my best. I give you the chain off my neck. I give you my love and respect. But now hear the story. Is you vex with me? Like I do you something. Like I do you something. When I hear the shout now, is you vex with me? Like I do the wrong thing. Like I do you something. Oh, it's a good thing. I in a good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes right up to the limits. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes ain't cast in a minute. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My friend and them couldn't tell you about me. Good people, it's good people. We only want love and we so good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My family couldn't tell you about me. Good people, it's good people. We only on love one.
I am all on foes like you never do bad. Things where you do say you never do that. Run for the cream and you never look back. Now money in the pocket so you never too sad. Boy, if money make you dance, you'll be dancing forever to the beat of a drum that never go help you.
But now hear the story. Is you vex with me? Like I do you something. Like I do you something. When I hear the shout now, is you vex with me? Like I do the wrong thing. Like I do you something. Oh, it's a good thing. I in a good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes right up to the limits. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes ain't cast in a minute. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah. I in a good spirit. I drink in a good spirits. The vibes right up to the limits. So don't hold me down, don't fight me down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good spirit.
What are you doing?
She said, let me cater to you. I say cater to me. She said, just relax and let me give you the thing. No. She said, take it easy, I will do the work. You don't have to wind up yourself. You don't have to wind up yourself. Oh, she said, take it easy, I will do the work. You don't have to wind up yourself. You don't have to wind up yourself. Oh, and then she bubble and she bubble and she bubble and whine. Push back is the greatest bed over. Push back, roll your waist and bend over. Push back, oh Miss Lady, bubble and she bubble and she bubble and whine. Push back, give me the greatest bed over. Push back, you are the wickedest bed over. Push back, why?
I wanna wine on your bumper. I know you like steam. I know you like vibes. I know you like speed. Clockwork, y'all bend down, touch your knee. It's a new wallpaper for my iPhone screen.
She said, let me cater to you. I say cater to me. She said, just relax and let me give you the thing. Yes, girl, I wanna give you the thing. She said, take it easy, I will do the work. You don't have to wind up yourself. You don't have to wind up yourself. Oh, she said, take it easy, I will do the work. You don't have to wind up yourself. You don't have to wind up yourself. Oh, and then she bubble and she bubble and she bubble and whine. Push back is the greatest bed over. Push back, roll your waist and bend over. Push back, oh Miss Lady, bubble and wine. Push back. Give me the greatest bend over. Push back. You are the wickedest bend over. Push back.
Oh, who are the rubber waist? Like a rubber band. You have your own things, you never rubber man.
And when you put on your costume bacchanal, every man want jam in your section. She said, let me cater to you. I say cater to me. She said, just relax and let me give you the thing. Yes, girl, I wanna give you the thing. She said, take it easy, I will do the work. You don't have to wind up yourself. You don't have to wind up yourself. Oh, she said, take it easy, I will do the work. You don't have to wind up yourself. You don't have to wind up yourself. Oh, and then she bubble and she bubble and she bubble and wine. Push back. Is the greatest bed over. Push back. Roll your waist and bend over. Push back. Oh, Miss Lady, bubble and she bubble and she bubble and wine. Push back. Give me the greatest bed over. Push back. You are the wickedest bed over. Push back. Oh.
Panorama. Beat the road like panorama. Heart I love, but I love me bacchanal. Love my bacchanal bad. The place mash up when we start to get on bad. Look the girl them ready, ready, ready. Look the truck man rolling, rolling, rolling. And there's 1,000 girl tongue in tongue. Whole day we drinking rum. Tell them don't slow me down. No, look how we beat the road like a panorama. Panorama, panorama. Inside the air. Look how we beat the road like a panorama. Panorama, panorama. Inside the air. Come let me start the bacchanal right now. Take a jump and a wind down. Tell them it's the time of the year, and we don't miss it. Start the bacchanal right now. Take a jump and a wind down. Tell them it's the time of the year, and we don't miss it. Tell them we born bad, mashing up everywhere. If they feel them more mad, we whip and we play, and we go win, and we go win, and we go win. Something about the pan when you hear the sound. That is the cute carnival coming round. Give them pan men a round of applause. Oh God. Look the girl them ready, ready, ready. Look the truck man rolling, rolling, rolling. And there's 1,000 girl tongue in tongue. Whole day we drinking rum. Tell them don't slow it down. No, look how we beat the road like a panorama. Panorama, panorama. Inside the air. Look how we beat the road like a panorama. Panorama, panorama. Inside the air. Come let me start the bacchanal right now. Take a jump and a wind down. Tell them it's the time of the year, and we don't miss it. Start the bacchanal right now. Take a jump and a wind down. Tell them it's the time of the year, and we don't miss it. Tell them we born bad, mashing up everywhere. If they feel them more mad, we whip and we play, and we go win, and we go win, and we go win. Look how we beat the road like a panorama. Panorama, panorama. Inside the air. Look how we beat the road like a panorama. Panorama, panorama. Inside the air. Come let me start the bacchanal right now. Take a jump and a wind down. Tell them it's the time of the year, and we don't miss it. Start the bacchanal right now. Take a jump and a wind down. Tell them it's the time of the year, and we don't miss it. Tell them we born bad, mashing up everywhere. If they feel them more mad, we whip and we play, and we go win, and we go win, and we go win. Baby, time is never enough. Even if we try to turn back the clock, just you and I, the present is us. So let we enjoy
enjoy this now, girl. Do it all over, drunk or sober, so high like a stoner. Time to feel the feeling again. All over, drunk or sober, so high like a stoner. Time to give them again. Like a throwback baby, throwback baby, throwback baby. Like back in time, back on my girl. Throwback baby, throwback baby, throwback baby. Like back in time, back on my girl. Go back, go back, go back. Throw back, throw back, throw back. Go back, go back, go back. Till the feeling come again. Go back, go back, go back. Throw back, throw back, throw back. Go back, go back, go back. Till the feeling come again. Alive, the present is home. So don't let your pride keep you alone. Some things in life we cannot control. So let we enjoy this now, girl. Do it all over, drunk or sober, so high like a stoner. Time to feel the feeling again. All over, drunk or sober, so high like a stoner. Time to give them again. Like a throwback baby, throwback baby, throwback baby. Like back in time, back on my girl. Throwback baby, throwback baby, throwback baby. Like back in time, back on my
Eyes are feta. Let we go along the road, carnival day. Let we play, cause eyes are feta. Cause eyes are feta. We're back on our list. I do, you do, we do. Cause eyes are feta.
Good evening, everyone. Let us just quiet our hearts and bow our heads as we pray. Almighty and ever-living God, we do well always and everywhere to give you praise and thanks. And as we gather together tonight to discuss the business of our people here in Trinidad and Tobago, it is no different. We acknowledge you, we praise you, we exalt you. We thank you for the gift of life, a gift that no one should try to steal nor have stolen. So we thank you for the opportunity to meet to talk about our very lives. I pray your blessings upon the People's National Movement and its leadership under our Member of Parliament for Arima, political leader, Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson. We thank you, Lord, for inspiring them to host these national consultations, and we ask, Lord, that you continue to guide them and all who seek the good of all citizens of our country. We pray, O Lord, that you bless the government and enable them to hear the voice of your people and heed that voice as your own voice, Lord. Stay with us in the power of your Holy Spirit and allow us to have a safe and productive meeting. With thanksgiving we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. And ladies and gentlemen, you may have your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very much a pleasure to be welcomed here in the constituency and borough of Arima here in East Trinidad. Such a beautiful place to be. And we thank you all for coming out here today for our national consultation on Stand Your Ground legislation. Allow me to firstly acknowledge the Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson, political leader of the People's National Movement, leader of the opposition, and your Member of Parliament for Arima, ladies and gentlemen. With that lusty round of applause, I know for sure we are in Arima here tonight. I want to acknowledge the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, Chairman of the People's National Movement and Member of Parliament for Aruca Lopino. I want to also acknowledge party officer, and we have here Lady Vice Chair of the People's National Movement, the Honorable Member of Parliament for St. Anne's, Nyan Gatsby Dolly. We acknowledge all party officers, deputy political leaders. Allow me to acknowledge Deputy Political Leader Mrs. Jennifer Batiste Primus and Deputy Political Leader as well, Mr. Sanjeev Budu. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to acknowledge party officers. I see we have our Education Officer, Dr. Jelani Reed. And I know I saw our Operations Officer, Ms. Irene Hines, here earlier on. And we have Member of Parliament, Dominic Romaine, here, ladies and gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, it would be remiss of me if I did not acknowledge a woman who's often termed, and rightfully so, the matriarch of the People's National Movement. Please give a lusty Arima welcome for Ms. Joan Yule Williams. I want to acknowledge all other party officers, members of parliament, senators, heads of local government corporations. Let me especially acknowledge the members of the Arima Borough Council here today, and thank you for hosting us as well. Specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, and especially those viewing live who are streaming this very important national consultation hosted by the People's National Movement. It is a pleasure to be invited into your homes and your spaces. My name is Vyash Nandlal, and I will be the moderator of this evening's national consultation on Stand Your Ground legislation, hosted by the People's National Movement. Of course, we are here in Arima today, and I welcome each of you who are here in attendance at the Arima Community Center. And especially, as I said, those of you who are listening live on Facebook, on social media, and all other platforms. Today's consultation, in keeping with the PNM's objective of educating, informing, and listening, is designed to be interactive and allow for a fruitful and educational discussion with our panel, with our esteemed and distinguished panel, and very knowledgeable, I should add, as well as to hear the views from you, the members of the audience, to hear from you, Arima, and surrounding constituencies on this matter of national importance. In our format, we intend to have opening remarks by the political leader of the People's National Movement, followed by a brief presentation on Stand Your Ground legislation. Our panel of experts will then assemble and engage in a discussion on the matter at hand, and hopefully that would provide a lot of information, it would provide a lot of clarity for you all, members of the audience. You will then have an opportunity, and we will have an opportunity to engage in a discussion, and that is where we get to hear from you, members. We get to hear your questions, we get to appreciate and hear your comments, and begin a dialogue with you and the members of the panel that we have here. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very packed evening for you, and we're hoping that it, again, is a very fruitful one, informative, and educational evening. So, without further delay, let us commence our program. And I begin with opening remarks. It is my distinct honor and pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to invite to bring opening remarks someone with a distinguished career in public service and in law. She has served our nation with integrity, resilience, and a deep commitment to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and I might add, to the people of Arima and wherever else she serves. From her early years as an attorney at law to her tenure as a member of parliament, cabinet, minister, ambassador, now leader of the opposition, and the first female political leader of the People's National Movement, she has been a trailblazer, breaking barriers, inspiring generations of women and men alike. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium to bring opening remarks our leader of the opposition and political leader of the People's National Movement and your Member of Parliament for Arima, the Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson.
Thank you, Vyash. Thank you, everyone. Just adjust a bit. I'm slightly shorter than Vyash, slightly. Thank you very much. Let me, of course, acknowledge I'm here in Arima and I see the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Jovan Roberts. I see all other councillors who are here. Thank you very much for attending and the support. Vyash, of course, gave us the entire list of protocol, but I must, of course, acknowledge all my deputy political leaders who are here, all my colleagues from Parliament, both in the upper house and in the lower house. Special acknowledgement, of course, to Madam June Yule Williams, former Minister of Community Development and Culture, and as Vyash said, our matriarch. I see former head of the Arima Businessman Association, Mr. Rampasad, former mayors, Mayor Cagney Casimir, and as well as former councillors, Melon Garcia, who I'm hoping will provide us with a little parang before
we finish this afternoon. And all other members of council, all other members of parliament, Arimians, those of you who are here to listen to this very, very important discussion, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, special good evening. Thank you so much, Cagney. We are discussing this stand your ground legislation at a very interesting time for us here in the country. It was just a few days ago that we had 7 murders in 24 hours. Sorry, I'm corrected, 9 murders in 24 hours for a very small country. But for us in Arima, we remember today Andrea Barrath, and we also remember that Trinidad and Tobago recorded the first triple murder in Arima in Guanapo, where a 6-year-old would have lost both his mother, father, and uncle with a home invasion just when they were closing up their little parlor. 2 masked men invaded, and 3 members of that family were killed. I know that for Member of Parliament, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez would specially recall that pensioner Leela Hyacinth Dan Clare, who was killed. And for me, coming home even closer was Hyacinth Gardner in Santa Rosa Heights, who was a resident of the United States and would come home from time to time and was here specifically to do some improvements to her home. The truth is that we in the People's National Movement understand the importance of dealing with the issue of crime. And at this point in time, there is a state of emergency. And that was the intervention that the government decided that was best having regard to all its circumstances. When I accepted responsibility to be the leader of the opposition, I made it very clear that we are willing to support good law. This piece of legislation, which you would find, I would make reference to one at least in the United States, Florida in particular. And that piece of legislation is often criticized for having caused what you call a shoot first mentality and questions asked later. And that, if you look at the research, they would tell you that the stand your ground laws in the United States have been linked actually to higher homicide rates and reduced accountability. In Florida, they have done studies, and that is the Harvard Injury Control Research Center, and found that such laws led to increased firearm-related deaths and fewer prosecutions and even questionable shootings. We are very fortunate in that we have some distinguished lawyers who will give you the opportunity to ask questions and will make the appropriate presentation. So I'm not here to go into any details, notwithstanding the fact that I'm a lawyer myself, but we will depend on the experts to give you some more information. We in the People's National Movement have decided that it is important to hear your views, not because we believe that you are experts, but because we believe that when we take a position in the Parliament, it would have been as a result of hearing your concerns, listening to your presentations, and indicating to you that we believe that this is the best method by which we can inform ourselves. So we started in Port of Spain, we went to Chagonas, we went to Point Fortin, we are here in Arima. Of course, we must go to Tobago, and we are also looking, of course, to go to Diego Martin, because Mr. De Nobrega in the back there has insisted that we have to come down to the west. Yes, Simon? Great. So at the end of the day, what is important is that we don't get into rhetoric where we go and say to you, if a man is running away, shoot, and then answer questions after. We know that the defense of self-defense exists. So we want to be clear what is the message that this government is sending to you members of the public. It is okay on a platform to say to load up the matic, and light it up. But when you are faced with a situation where you act and you know that the police has a responsibility to investigate, to make a recommendation, you do not want to find yourselves on the wrong side of the law, where you have to end up behind bars and wait for the court to determine your guilt or your innocence, when you may have very well convinced yourself that based on the grandstanding of those who have given you advice, that you act, and then you find that you have to wait several years behind bars before a decision is made. So I want to urge you to listen very carefully to those who are going to make a presentation here this evening. I want to urge you to take these discussions very seriously, and this is the time to ask your questions, because when the bill is being debated in Parliament and we have to make our presentations, at that time you won't have the opportunity to speak. But you do have the opportunity to speak, and as we assure you, our responsibility is to listen. So I want to close by saying thanks to my colleague, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez and his team for having organized this event. I want to say thanks to Simon. I'm doing it in advance. And I want to say thanks to all the presenters who have been going around the country sharing with us the importance of the Stand Your Ground legislation and giving you the opportunity to not only just inform and educate yourselves, but most importantly, to ask the kind of questions that could put you in a better frame of mind so you would understand the legislation. We all know that if you are at home and somebody invades, on the spur of the moment, you are not going to be thinking whether, a lawyer will be there, whether or not I will be charged or I will not be charged. Because if you, as many people, as in the situation I just told you, where you are locking up your mini-mart and you're going quietly about your business and somebody comes to attack you, you want to be, your instinct is to protect yourself, to protect your family. And the People's National Movement want to ensure you that our concern is for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to feel safe, for communities to feel safe, and for people to make better decisions on any issue, including this one that we are going to deal with here tonight. So again, let me thank all the presenters. Let me especially thank those of you who have taken the time to come here this evening so you can listen to us. And there's some of you who may be experts in the field who may also educate us and give us the kind of information that we too can make the best decision. So I want to say again, thank you very much to all of you who are here, and we look forward to a very fruitful and beneficial discussions. I also want to say to others that there are seats in front, so you can come up and make sure that you can, listen carefully. Thank you again.
Thank you, the Honorable Penelope Beckles Robinson, political leader of the People's National Movement, leader of the opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, today's session is to listen, to educate, and to inform. So we move directly into that segment of this evening's program, ladies and gentlemen, and I will firstly introduce our panel who will be here to begin that conversation with you, to begin informing and educating and providing some details on stand your ground legislation and the bill that is before Parliament. And after that, we would have a small discussion among the members, and then we will flow directly into the segment where we get interactive with members of the audience and persons viewing and listening live. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our distinguished and esteemed panel who will be here today and who will provide that information for you on the Stand Your Ground legislation. I begin by welcoming an attorney at law and also deputy political leader of the People's National Movement, a dedicated servant of the people and advocate for progressive policies. He brings both legal expertise and a deep understanding of governance to the table. His perspective on how this legislation intersects with national priorities and the lived realities of citizens will be very invaluable to this conversation we are about to have. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Deputy Political Leader of the People's National Movement, Mr. Sanjeev Bodu. Welcome, Sanjeev. Ladies and gentlemen, our next panelist is again a distinguished attorney at law with a career focusing on criminal law but spanning civil and family law as well. She's a dedicated legal practitioner who combines academic excellence as well as practical expertise, holding a master's degree in corporate and commercial law with a distinction. Beyond her practice, she's also a trained mediator, having brought her skills to important institutions such as the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. Her breadth of experience and commitment to justice makes her a valuable voice on this panel, as you can imagine, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me, Arima, and members of the audience, in welcoming Senator the Honorable Janelle John Bates. Welcome, Senator John Bates. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot only have the legal perspective. We need another dimension, because stand your ground law is not just a legal matter. So we are joined by a well-respected psychologist whose work has focused on social behavior, community safety, and mental health implications of crime and justice. His expertise will help us better understand the human and social dimensions of this stand your ground debate, particularly how such laws impact families, communities, and the psychology of safety. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an expert in psychology here, well respected nationally and well known, I might add. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Sule Joseph. Welcome, Sule. I invite you to join our panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we commence with our panel discussion, I would like to invite to the podium to give a presentation on this Stand Your Ground legislation and to present to you some facts and some information that will hopefully stir up some of those ideas, some of those questions, and some of those comments from you, the members of the audience. So without any delay, ladies and gentlemen, let me invite to the podium Mr. Sanjeev Bodu to give a brief presentation on Stand Your Ground legislation.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Vyash. Political leader, leader of the opposition and member of parliament, Mrs. Penelope Beckles, Robin's son, members of Parliament, my own MP, Mr. Dominic Romain, Chairman, Lady Vice Chairman, Deputy Political Leader, Mrs. Jo Newell Williams, who I must comment was an acting Prime Minister in a PNM government. We have to continue addressing misinformation all the time. Former Member of Parliament, Mr. Garcia, former Member of Parliament, Mr. Monroe, other members of Parliament, members of the business community, former Mayor, Deputy Mayor, former Deputy Mayor, whom I saw in the back somewhere there, councillors, aldermen, members of the Arima constituency, ladies and gentlemen. So, as Viash indicated, this is our consultation. It's not a lecture, and so I'll do my best to keep it as brief as possible. And I'll start with going through a bit of details about the bill that is proposed by the government to be laid in the Parliament. And it's entitled the Home Invasion, Self-Defense and Defense of Property Bill 2025. So it in fact does not say anything about stand your ground in the title of the bill. And I'll go through various bit of clauses in that bill. But the first and most important thing about the bill is that it seeks to establish the offense of home invasion. And that is to provide a person that a person has no duty to retreat when operating in self-defense or defense of his property. To provide that a person may use defensive force, including deadly force, to protect himself or his property, and for other related matters. So that is the introduction of two things: the offense of home invasion and the removal, ostensibly, of the duty to retreat when operating in self-defense. So it is under certain conditions. This bill requires support of a three-fifths majority in both houses of Parliament. And it goes on to provide that an occupant in lawful possession of a dwelling house has no duty to retreat from a home invader and has the right to stand his ground and use defensive force in order to protect himself, his property, or another person. The bill would establish the offense of home invasion and set out the parameters of the offense. This would include the unlawful entry by a person, the home invader, into a dwelling house with the intent to use force or threaten the imminent use of force on occupants of the dwelling house. The offense of home invasion would cater for instances in which a home invader intentionally causes any injury to occupants of a dwelling house, including grievous bodily harm, grievous sexual assault, rape, and death. Now, those are four things that we know exist in law already. Those are four things that are prohibited in law already. A home invasion may involve a home invader stealing, damaging, or destroying property in the dwelling house with or without the use of intimidation, threats, or violence. A home invasion may involve the use of a weapon, a firearm, or an explosive device in order to cause grievous bodily harm, permanent disability, permanent disfigurement, or death to any person in a dwelling house. Provision is also made for aggravating factors where a home invasion is carried out by a member of a gang, a participant in an organized criminal activity, or in the presence of a child, senior citizen, differently abled, or vulnerable person. I want to stick up in there. Now, taking that apart a little bit, right? Aggravating factors where a home invasion is carried out by a member of a gang. That introduces the need for the prosecution, as it were, to prove a separate offense altogether, because this legislation does not speak about how do you determine someone is a member of a gang. Of course, that is gang, anti-gang legislation. Participant in an organized criminal activity, it is the same. The anti-gang legislation addresses that. And then when you get to these factors, the presence of a child, a senior citizen, a differently abled or vulnerable person. Now, these are what you call aggravating factors that are already examined in court in the sentencing process when somebody is convicted with a criminal offense. So all of these things are already taken into account when you're looking at the criminal justice system. All right, now I'm going to move on here now, and this addresses Clause 7. The bill would provide that an occupant of a dwelling house has no duty to retreat from a home invader and has the right to stand his ground when acting in self-defense. Again, there's a qualification to the circumstances under which you have no duty to retreat from a home invader and you have a right to stand your ground. And I'll repeat, when acting in self-defense. This would arise in circumstances where the occupant believes on reasonable grounds, further qualification, believes on reasonable grounds that force was being used or threatened by the home invader, or that the occupant's life or that of another person was in immediate danger or threat of danger. Additionally, the occupant must also believe that his actions were necessary and reasonable to defend or protect himself or another person from the use or threat of force, and that the defensive force used was proportionate to the threat he honestly believed to exist. All of those words in that very long sentence means that there are several qualifications that has to be established if one is to successfully rely on self-defense, on being able to successfully prove that you've stood your ground. And we go on further. In determining whether defensive force used was reasonable, there are several factors which the court is required to take into account. This would include, among other things, the nature of the force or threat, whether any party to the incident used or threatened to use a weapon, firearm, or explosive device, the nature, duration, and history of any relationship between the parties to the incident, the nature and proportionality of the occupant's response to the use of or threat of force, and whether the occupant did what he honestly and instinctively thought was necessary for a legitimate purpose. For the purpose of self-defense during a home invasion, the use of deadly force may be justified where an occupant reasonably believes such force is necessary to prevent imminent death, grievous bodily harm, grievous sexual assault, or rape. Again, I'll pause here. Ladies and gentlemen, does any of that sound that you could load up your matic, knock it on them again and again? It doesn't, right? It sounds very much like you have to prove that you have actually acted in self-defense. You've acted reasonably, you've acted proportionally or proportionately. That's what it sounds like. Now, in the previous consultations, this issue came up, so I'll address it frontally. And this is in relation to Section 8 of the bill. It relates to defense of property, and the bill would provide that an occupant of a dwelling house has no duty to retreat from a home invader and has the right to stand his ground when acting in defense of his property. This would arise in circumstances where the occupant uses or threatens to use force or takes any other action he reasonably believes to be necessary in order to prevent a home invader from entering his dwelling house, to cause a home invader to leave his dwelling house, to protect his property or that of another person from theft, damage, or destruction by a home invader, or to prevent or stop a home invader from committing a serious criminal offense in the dwelling house. For the purpose of defense of property during a home invasion, the use of deadly force may be justified, we have it again, may be justified, where an occupant reasonably believes that using or threatening to use such force is necessary to prevent or remove a home invader from the dwelling house, or to protect his property or that of another property. Now, my colleagues here will go through the bill with you as questions arise and so on. So I'm not going to belabor the lecture part of this at all, and I'd rather get into some conversation about what the narrative has been as the government has attempted to introduce this bill to the population. And insofar as the political leader has spoken about the comments made in relation to shooting people in the back and so on, I came across something interesting. I want to read it for you. It wasn't first on my list. And here it is. Now, this is the UK position, right? The position in the United Kingdom and Wales. And it's headed, Pursuit of a Fleeing Intruder. The pursuit of a fleeing intruder by a householder is no longer regarded as acting in self-defense, and so the same degree of force may not be reasonable. The householder is, however, still allowed to use reasonable force to recover his property and make a citizen's arrest, acting out of malice and revenge with the intent of inflicting punishment through injury or death would not be regarded as reasonable. Does that sound that you're going to be protected by this legislation if you were to shoot somebody in the back who's running away from you? I mean, it's literally entitled Pursuit of a Fleeing Intruder. And this is the position in the UK. And as you all know, our final court of appeal is the United Kingdom Privy Council, the UKPC. So, let's talk about the narrative a little bit. In fact, let's talk about the history. Now, I've told you what the bill proposes to introduce, right? And the two main points are the offense of home invasion and the removal of the duty to retreat. But in the common law, which is the other system of law we have, where something is not written in law, the courts hear cases and try cases in practicality and make rulings and judgments, and that's how precedent is established, and that's how case law comes about. And so there's something called the Castle Doctrine. And it's been described as, and I quote, affirmative defenses for individuals charged with criminal homicide. The Castle Doctrine is a common law doctrine stating that an individual has no duty to retreat when in his or her home or castle, and may use reasonable force, including deadly force, to defend his or her property, person, or another. Outside of the castle, however, an individual has a duty to retreat, if able to do so before using reasonable force. Stand your ground laws, by comparison, remove the common law requirement to retreat outside of one's castle, allowing an individual to use force in self-defense when there is reasonable belief of a threat. Deadly force is reasonable under stand your ground laws in certain circumstances, such as imminent great bodily harm or death. So again, you have all of these qualifications, even in the common law, and the comparison between the common law position and the legislated position, or the proposed legislated position. And that tells you that right now, the common law applies to each and every one of us. If it is you are in your home, and an intruder comes into your home, and you use force such as necessary, that ends in the person's death, that is a successful self-defense, and that is the law right now. So it begs the question, what exactly is this particular legislation attempting to fix? What is the fever that we have for which this is medicine? We have to ask ourselves that, because if it is a government that's going to Parliament to introduce law, particularly law that is of this sensitivity and requires a 3/5 majority, we have to ask ourselves very reasonably, what is the intention of the legislation? What is the true intention of the government? And what is the problem that we have that the legislation is attempting to fix? Now, the bill is modeled largely after the Florida position on stand your ground, which is the first state in the United States to enact stand your ground legislation codifying the Castle Doctrine. And so I just want to read some comments here. And it says, when these conditions are met, stand your ground, a person is allowed to stand his ground and meet force with force, including deadly force, if he or she reasonably believes it is necessary to do so to prevent death or great bodily harm to himself or herself or another person, or to prevent the commission of a forcible felony. And it goes on here. Immunity from prosecution or civil suit for the use of deadly force in self-defense was also extended to beyond actions which took place in the home. And the Florida law was amended after 2005 when it was first introduced, with presumptions in favor of the accused. The accused there is the homeowner, regarding, quote-unquote, reasonable fear, when the accused claims defensive force within a dwelling. An expansive definition is attached to dwelling, which includes occupied motor vehicles in Florida. And of the Florida stand your ground law, one notes, for police to arrest a person for using or threatening to use force, there must be probable cause that the force used or threatened was unlawful. That is to say, the person was not lawfully standing your ground. Now, that is the position in the Florida legislation, but nowhere in this bill does it guide the police on any probable cause. In other words, I have mentioned to you that there are several factors that the court has to take into consideration. Now, any observer would determine that if the court has to take something into consideration, it means that you, the homeowner, have now found yourself before the court. And the only way to find yourself before the court in a situation like this is after an arrest and charge. And that is another significant issue that we have recognized has not been addressed at all in the bill. But it has been addressed in Florida, and it's called a pre-trial immunity hearing in Florida. And if an accused in Florida is entitled to immunity from prosecution where he defended himself, another or his property against an intruder during home invasion, in such cases, the accused is entitled to file a motion to dismiss the charges against him before his case goes to trial. So it is something like a preliminary inquiry that takes place very proximate to the time of your arrest. Practically, the way it works is, home invader comes into your home, you've used force against him, the person might be dead, the police have to make an arrest based on their investigation. But very soon after that, perhaps, ideally within the next 48 hours, you are taken before a judge and you are given the opportunity to put evidence before the judge to convince the judge that you've acted in self-defense, at least on the face of it. And therefore, the prosecution is then given the burden. The burden shifts to the prosecution to prove that you did not act in self-defense. And that's how it's done in Florida. Whereas in this bill, there's no mention of an immunity hearing at all. So it leads us to assume or believe that you're simply going to be arrested and run through the bill like every other criminal. When you had stood your ground in your home and somebody has ended up dead or seriously injured. And that is a serious defect. So, in consideration of the time, I think I'll end there, and I expect that a lot more will be developed during the consultation phase. And ladies and gentlemen, I really, if I could take the opportunity to encourage you to engage with us, ask as many questions as you can, so we can have a fruitful outcome of this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sanjeev Budu. And really, ladies and gentlemen, that presentation was meant to just whet your appetites to start the conversation. Before I move forward, let me acknowledge the Honorable Christian Birchwood, Member of Parliament for Laventille East, Mova. I also see we have in the audience here the former Member of Parliament for Toko Sangre Grande, as previously acknowledged, Roger Monroe. And we also have the Chairman of the Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation, Josiah Austin. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very full house here in Arima today, and I am very certain that our discussion is going to be very engrossing and engaging. So we now move to the other stage of our program here today, ladies and gentlemen, where I ask the panel to engage. And of course, I see former Member of Parliament, please permit me, of Arima, Mr. Garcia, ladies and gentlemen, please acknowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, so I now move to our panel, and I ask some pointed questions to engage in further discussion and to bring them into this topic here. So firstly, Senator John Bates, you have a unique background in the DPP and looking at matters of prosecution. So we have a bill that's dealing with self-defense. And I want to ask you, from your unique legal perspective, what are your perceptions and what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this bill?
My thoughts on this bill really hinge on the rhetoric accompanying the bill. When you hear assertions such as shoot first, explain later, shoot them in the back when they're running, it gives the populace the impression that this bill gives them a license to kill at will with no ramifications. But that is not the case. If the police still have a duty, if there's someone murdered or found dead, on your property, the police still have a duty to investigate. And they could very well come to the conclusion after the investigation that your actions, even though you're a homeowner, may not have been reasonable as per required by the bill. The defensive force was not within the parameters of the bill. And if they take it to the DPP and he agrees with them, he can then direct that you be charged. And we know what follows when you're charged. You have to go before court. You have to think about bail, finding money for bail. How does it affect your job? How does it affect visa? All these ramifications that I think that they are being lost in the discussion because we're just saying load up pneumatic, and that's it. So that is what first came to my mind. And the second thing, sorry, from a legal perspective, came to my mind is that we're saying here, this bill now removes the duty to retreat. Under the common law, as it currently stands, there's no positive duty to retreat. So it's almost being made to sound like right now, if somebody comes to your home, you must run first. That is not the case. The case law says that there's no positive obligation to retreat at this moment. When the issue of self-defense arises, whether or not you could have retreated, it's just one of the issues that will be considered. And it's also so under this new bill. In this bill, it says that one of the things the court will consider is whether or not you could have retreated. So those are the two things that I want to say at first.
Thank you, Senator. And staying on that topic that you raised, and Sanjeev as well, on the rhetoric, we have heard shoot them in their backs, shoot first, ask questions later. I want to bring in our psychologists into the conversation and ask you, Sule, when you create expectations like this, and as we are hearing, the legislation that is before us is seemingly not allowing for such immunities and for such actions, how do you marry the expectation with the reality from your unique background?
Let me start by saying all protocols observed, as was previously mentioned, and then good afternoon, Arima. I heard this side and not that side. I'm feeling like a soca artist here, but then the other side, time a good afternoon. I don't know if you all not feeling a good afternoon. Good afternoon, Arima. Thank you. All right. So, my concern, my professional concern with this stems. I'm not even addressing the bill specifically. What I'm addressing here is a significant difference in what is being said is in the bill versus what is actually in it. Could you imagine, Arima, for 1 minute here, just bear with me. Imagine that you are planning to all the bills that you have to pay at the end of the month, right? You could imagine them, because I'm sure you have bills to pay at the end of this month. And while you are planning to pay your bills at the end of the month, somewhere in the middle of October here, your boss tells you you're not getting your full salary. So at the end of the month, coming to the end of the month when you're expecting to have your salary, you don't get your full salary. Your expectation now does not meet your reality. Right? Some of us might go straight to the bar and just drink off the little bit of money that we have, right? You can't pay the bills. However, that experience that you're having there is what we call a cognitive dissonance. There's a break between what the reality is and what you are thinking and what your expectation is. And the issue I have professionally is that what is being said, the expectation that people have of what they'll be able to do based on what is being said on the platform is not matched with what is actually in the bill. That may cause cognitive dissonance. And it's a big word just to say that what people may leave with is what they actually want to hear. So people may leave with load up the matic and knock it on them again and again. People may leave with, it doesn't matter if it's a police officer, shoot first and find out after. It is better to be judged by 12 than to be carried by 6. Right? So that is the information that will stay registered in persons' minds, and most people won't go to the bill and read it. Most persons won't, even if they get the information, digest that. That cognitive dissonance is what we will experience, and I have a concern. My concern is regardless of what we put here, people will leave with what is said on the platform. And that can lead to a whole host of other things I think we'll get into as we go through the day, vigilantism and all sorts of things. I think throughout the course of the evening, we will be discussing those things. Yeah?
Thank you. Thank you, Sule. Sanjeev, I want to bring you back into the conversation because we are talking about stand your ground. And there's a question here. What is your ground? So can you just go into that a bit and explain to us or let us know from the bill that we have in front of us, the home invasion bill, what is your ground? What is that ground that you are allowed to stand in or stand on? Is it your property? Is it your home? And then we have very ambiguous definitions. What happens to persons who are squatting? What about areas of property disputes or border disputes between properties?
Thank you for the question. So, looking at Section 4 of the Act in particular, it defines several things, including a dwelling house, which includes a structure or part of a structure, whether permanent or temporary, whether fixed or capable of being moved, which is designed or adapted for use as a dwelling house. Any adjacent land, building, or other structure within the same curtilage as a dwelling house and occupied for the same purpose, or an associated place, or a boat, ship, or other vehicle in or on which a person resides, which has been designed or adapted for use of dwelling. And it is immaterial if the dwelling house is from time to time uninhabited. And then we look at what is a curtilage. A curtilage in relation to a dwelling house means an area immediately surrounding or adjacent to the dwelling house, which is used in conjunction with the dwelling house regardless of whether the area is surrounded by a fence, a natural boundary, or a combination of both, or is enclosed in a manner that indicates the occupant's intention to keep persons off his property. Also, there is a definition for an associated place, which goes on to say any place that is used exclusively in connection with or for purposes ancillary to the occupation of a dwelling house, or any place where a dwelling house is one or of two or more dwelling houses in one building or group of buildings that occupants of the dwelling houses use in common with each other. So you are right to say it's that large, wide, expansive definition. And today, on that note, I actually read of a case in New Orleans, and of course it's in the state of Louisiana, which enacted stand your ground legislation in 2006, but already had the Castle Doctrine adopted in its case law. And there was an interesting comment there. I'll read the quote. Many people don't really understand, that you can't just take out your gun and shoot someone just because you believe you might be at risk. Justified self-defense is an exception to the general rule that you are not allowed to use physical force against other people. It's only in cases of absolute necessity. And this is the case where one neighbor shot another on the pavement outside of both of their homes in an area that we could describe in Trinidad as a gated community that generally has no fences between houses and that sort of thing, which is generally the case in the US. And so it's interesting because when you tie that the recent commentary from the government on legislation about gated communities, it begs the question as to, well, whether it is the population is being told the truth as to what is the intention of stand your ground compared with gated community legislation, when in the face of it, we have right now a unique situation of a cabinet minister being on a criminal charge and sitting in the cabinet. That tells the population one thing and another at the same time. Is it that we are to take onto ourselves the duty of protecting ourselves from criminal elements while others could be charged with a criminal offense and sit in the cabinet? I mean, this whole thing brings more questions than answers, Vyash.
Thank you, Sanjeev. And as we come to the conclusion, or we are approaching the conclusion of this brief panel discussion, Janelle, again, or Senator Bates, John Bates, I would like you to lean again. I see in your background you have some experience in family law. And I want to ask, we have domestic situations that are complicated. We have spouses that may be separated. We have persons who may be visiting and living with people. How does this law treat with someone who may want to stand their ground in a circumstance of a domestic situation or complicated domestic situations?
Well, the law says there are exceptions to when you can rely on the self-defense as outlined in this bill. And one of the exceptions is that you cannot use it against another occupant. And in most domestic situations, it's a situation where somebody lives in the house or had a right to live in the house because of the common law or mother or father and so forth. So by this law, you are not actually allowed to rely on this law in such a situation against another person who normally or has the permission to live in the house with you. So it becomes ticklish because people may think, well, I'm standing my ground here because I'm in a a domestic abuse, a situation of domestic abuse. But I must say, though, that you have other laws that you can depend on. Whether or not you can depend on this law to defend yourself, you can always defend yourself if you're in danger.
Thank you, Senator. And Sule, I want to bring you into this same conversation, tying in expectation versus reality, the conversation you had before with cognitive dissonance, and tying that into the family and domestic situation and complications that could occur. Do you have a perspective on that?
Yes, and I'll take it. I'll take it maybe a little further than maybe you intended. When one of the things we all feel, and if anybody does not feel it, feel free to say that you don't experience that. But we have this deep desire to protect those that are closest to us. Yes? No? Yeah. We want to protect those that are closest to us. Be that our children, our grandchildren, your spouse. Right? And it could be protecting them from a cockroach, but you want to protect them nonetheless. Sometimes you're in a situation, somebody said no, but sometimes you're in a situation perhaps where you may be fearful of the situation itself, but your desire to protect the person closest to you trumps and supersedes that, right? In those situations where we emotionally are swept with the desire to protect, we are overwhelmed, right? Those are difficult circumstances in which you're asking people to perform and think through go through the checklist. All right. Did I tell the person to exit my premises? Yes, I did. Okay, check that. Did I ask the person to back up before I shoot them? I did that. Okay, check that. And run through the checklist that the bill is asking you to run through before you open up the firearm on them, right? That is a difficult space to be in. Further to that, I do also have concerns. If you look at what literature is saying abroad, there's an increase in firearm deaths when we open up firearm legislation, when we open up stand your ground and so on. There's an increase statistically in firearm deaths and an increase in vigilantism. There's a big word just to say, if we don't feel safe and you're telling me that my job is now to be the TTPS in my own house, I am to be the policeman in my own house, then what is stopping me and my neighbor partner from coming together and protecting each other's houses? It is encouraging for me to become the police officer, right? Without the salary. So you're asking me to take on the roles and responsibility of a police officer, and that may encourage vigilantism. And vigilantism, as we've seen in the States, may encourage patrols in communities and the shooting of innocent people. You might have a cousin, a relative, or somebody who is now coming into a home, and the people in the community are unfamiliar with this person. And a young boy might get shot innocently, and the only thing left to say is sorry. And we will stand your ground legislation, right? I think we have a lot that we need to consider before we pass this. And if I may, just really quickly also put in, I am not sure that as a society we are emotionally mature enough for some of these things just yet. As a population, and you could ask yourself if you think I'm being harsh to us, when we enjoy things, Carnival and Christmas and party, we enjoy it all the way 110%. That's when we're happy. When we angry in the moment, we angry 120%. So we swing very heavily based on moods. We are not an emotionally mature people. And so to introduce stand your ground and firearm conversations into that, could you imagine some road rage incidents in Trinidad and people have fire? I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Sule. Much appreciated the perspectives of the panel. And ladies and gentlemen, this was just meant to be a brief conversation to stimulate your thinking, to hopefully provide a fertile ground for questions and comments. And I know in the crowd, I'm very sure we may even have some subject matter experts who will have your perspectives to share. And this is the time, ladies and gentlemen. This is the part in our program where we hear from you, where you have your members of parliament here, you have the political leader, you have the chief whip senators as well. They are here to listen to you, the members of the audience, and the viewing and listening members of the public who are tuned in on social media. So before we move into that segment, allow me to please lay down some ground rules as to how we manage this, and we will do it in a very structured way. So ladies and gentlemen, we have a mic to my left, which is your right, and we are asking members of the audience to line up in a very orderly manner. We are asking, as you ask your questions or make your comments, as much as possible to limit it to one question or comment. We are asking you to be very direct and short, sticking to maybe roughly under 1 minute. And of course, we are here to discuss stand your ground legislation, so we definitely ask members stick to the issue. We have gone through a very extensive protocol list, so simply saying all protocols observed or I stand on the established protocols will be sufficient. Of course, persons tend to give long preambles with questions. That will not be necessary, as we are asking persons to be very direct. And of course, above all, we ask persons to remain respectful at all times. If the moderator has to intervene to bring back the conversation, back to topic, I will. So ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, the floor is open. Members of the audience are asked to line up and be prepared to deliver your questions to the panel, who are very knowledgeable and will try their best to answer. And as well, we are asking, as you ask your questions, to please provide your name and location. It could be your constituency. So I see we already have a line there, so sir.
Good evening all. Standing on the established protocols, Jovan Roberts from the Malabar Mausika constituency and the Arima Borough Council. This is the Home Invasion, Self-Defense and Defense of Property Bill. And I would like to just focus on the self-defense aspect of it. Currently, an individual could justify the use of force once it is proportionate to a threat that they are posed with, right? And they have the defense of the common law self-defense. Now, my question is this bill intended to replace the self-defense common law? And let me just say before I ask that, I would have heard a member of parliament, I believe MP Saddam Hussein, say that the intention of the bill is to take the common law and express it in writing or to codify the law. And if that is the case, would it replace the bill, or would it be a duality where an individual has either the option to use the common law of self-defense as a defense or the stand your ground legislation? And I say that because in the bill as it is written, when you go to the section for self-defense, I believe that is section 4, there it says that, well, it focuses mainly on an occupier, the home invader, and more or less the owner of the property. But if I am here in the community center and I use defense because somebody threatened me, what then becomes my defense to justify my action? So that is where the question is coming from, in terms of if I am not at home, but I defend myself, do I still have the defense of self-defense? Or if this bill replaces that, then what do I have as a defense for my actions? Thank you.
Hello? Yes, this bill focuses on self-defense as it relates to being in your home. If you're outside of your home, you will still have the common law self-defense to rely on in a situation that arises in a public place. So have no fear.
Thank you. Sir?
Pleasant evening all protocols observed. Councillor Kadim Graham, constituency of St. Joseph. Citizens within Trinidad and Tobago are already living in fear, and some don't trust the justice system. And if this law is passed, my question to you, Mr. Sanjeev Wudu, do you think the courts will be ready to deal with the complexities that this law may bring? Thank you.
One, two, yes. Thank you for the question, Councillor. First, let me express that I have absolutely no reservations about the integrity of the justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. As a practicing attorney in litigation, I've never had any cause to doubt the integrity of the judiciary. But what I expect to happen, and of course, I think Senator John Bates may want to weigh in on this as a former prosecutor. What I expect to happen is that the police, if this bill is passed, they are going to be challenged with how do they determine whether someone is to be charged, a homeowner is to be charged if they attempt to rely on the legislation as a defense. And it would seem to me that on the face of the bill as it is drafted, the police will have no choice but to arrest and charge a person and put them to the burden of to proof, to put them to proof of self-defense in the courts. And that, therefore, is going to cause, obviously, an influx of matters in the criminal justice system. You're going to be charged with a criminal offense. So you're going to be in the criminal justice system, which we know is not the speediest that it can be. But certainly, I mean, with the introduction of a JIPA legislation, the moving away from the preliminary inquiry situation, all of that, we've had a significant quickening of criminal proceedings. In fact, the prosecution is always held to sanctions. And matters are being struck out. In fact, yesterday I was in court when a matter was struck out, dismissed by a master for non-compliance with the prosecution for the particular requirements now of a JIPA. So that while the criminal justice system has been sped up, any influx in matters is going to simply add to an already burdened system. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I see we have another question there.
Yes, good afternoon. I am Hazel Maitland Joseph from Malabar constituency. Now, I wrote my thing to be sure of it, right? However, I'm a beloved daughter of the Most High God, right?
Yeah,
All protocols observed.
sorry, can you speak into the mic, please?
Oh, I'm not
so
doing
we
it?
can all hear you.
Okay, hearing better now? All
Yes.
protocols observed. Because of my limited knowledge of the stand your ground legislation, I can't say much. However, because I try to remain aware of what's going on around me and what's happening, I cannot support it. My decision is based on two occurrences that happened in Trinidad and Tobago. Right on May 30th, a Tobago cop killed a 74-year-old man who was impaired. He was hearing impaired, and he was his neighbor because he knocked on the wrong door. And the other thing that happened was on September the 28th, a 64-year-old retired cop shot two young men in Aruca. He said he did not recognize them until they identified themselves when they came out of the vehicle. Right? So because of this, well, thank God I got a little information this evening. So my decision is based on these things. And based on these occurrences, I believe many innocent individuals would be killed, individuals who have issues with others, or like I heard today, due to malice, may believe they can load up the matic and, kill people, stand their ground, and will be covered by the law. And again, I learned this evening, well, that would be considered a cognitive dissonance. Right. So people's lives matter, and I have been taught to preserve life. So my question then would be, how would these cases be treated, right, in this matter? The main reason I came to this session this evening, I wouldn't say it because you say it is only for this reason, for stand your ground, right? But I still want to say it because that's why I came, right?
You have another question there, ma'am?
Yes, it will be short.
Okay.
Because right now, I am very concerned about what's going on in the country. I spoke with a friend. I told a friend that I want to move a vote of no confidence in the government. They tell me I can't do it. So I am here to be guided as to how to do it. You hear? Because I am ready to any action to be taken to do that. And right, this is it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Janelle, Senator.
Thank you, ma'am, for raising that very critical issue. That situation with Mr. Sandy in Tobago, I actually have it noted here because though it seems like a one-off situation now, it is not unique. In the US, they have a plethora of situations like that. Because of this law, people are indeed shooting first. I have another example here of a maintenance worker in North Carolina called Baron Castillo. He was shot in the chest mistakenly trying to get in the wrong apartment for repair. So he was a repairman. He went to the wrong apartment. He was trying to get in, and the homeowner shot him mistakenly, but because with the same concept, shoot first, explain later. So I am also very concerned about the likelihood of the increase in, let's say, shooting mistaken identity. And of course, the issue of vigilantism ties into that. That was spoken about by Mr. Joseph. And also what normally accompanies that in America is the ethnic profiling of individuals. So these are real concerns, and you ask how the police would deal with that. Well, as they are dealing with it now, they have to investigate. Most likely they would go to the DPP, and the DPP would give them the correct guidance as he sees it, whether to charge a person or not. So thank you for raising that critical issue.
Thank you. Sir, just before you go, allow me to bring and direct an online question that I think should be directed to Sule. So Sule, the question from Kerwin is asking, what about the issues of a person who may have had some sort of trauma, and I see in brackets here domestic violence in the past, may have been a victim of gun violence in the past, and the legal owner of a firearm, if faced with a situation where they have to make a split-second decision, won't that trauma affect their response?
The short answer, yes. But more importantly, in that situation, with this person who has been traumatized by violence and so on, I would argue that most of us as Trinbagonians have experienced some sort of traumatic criminal event, if it's not through you personally, through some relative or somebody, so you have experienced it through secondary channels, right? So you can experience trauma, by the way, secondarily, right? So we would have experienced some sort of trauma through criminal activity and so on. That tends to create something that we call hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is a fancy term just to say that you're always, your neck on a swivel. You're basically always looking around because you are expecting that something can happen. And when you are hypervigilant, you are more likely, if you have a firearm, to use it. When you mix that with another condition that we call inattentional blindness, it is usually when you hear people who are in police officers and so on, or persons who have firearms, they see whoever they are shooting at in a possession of a firearm when that person does not have one. And they may genuinely see that out of the fear, out of the trauma. So they may see the person put their hand in the pocket and assume they saw a firearm in the pocket and open fire. And that is a very real possibility for persons who have trauma. I don't see anything here that requires persons who face any kind of gun-related trauma required to go for counseling and therapy and stuff or whatever before they reissue their firearm. I don't see that. And it is a very real concern and possibility that through trauma, you can have an increase in shootings and innocent shootings at that.
Thank you, Sule. Sir, name and location.
Good night, everyone. Dexter Cornelius Nicholas Williams, 4th generation Arimian. Preamble. In the 2022 case of Tony Earls in Houston, Texas, a man fired multiple shots after his wife was robbed at an ATM, believing the suspect had fled into a nearby vehicle. Tragically, one of those bullets struck and killed 9-year-old Arlene Alvarez, who was sitting in her family's car. Earls claimed self-defense under Texas stand-your-ground law, arguing he was protecting himself and his wife from what he perceived as an ongoing threat. However, a jury rejected this defense, finding his actions reckless and sentencing him to 20 years in prison. Question: given this case, where a mistaken perception of danger led to the death of an innocent child, how should lawmakers, law enforcement, and the public weigh the benefits of stand your ground laws that empower citizens to defend themselves against the potential for tragic misjudgment and misuse of deadly force? What safeguards or reforms, if any, could ensure such laws protect legitimate self-defense without increasing unnecessary harm? I would really like all members of the panel to give me a little view on it, especially Sanjeev. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sanjeev?
Thank you, sir. It might be useful to point out I am a second generation Arima. So the way I look at it is, in exploring a potential defense in those circumstances, one would have to take into consideration all of the factors. To what extent was an honest belief held by the gun owner, as it were, right? How is a court able to measure what is an honest belief of an imminent threat? And then you have to weigh that against reasonableness, proportionality. Is it reasonable to discharge a firearm in the direction of the public at large, beyond bushes that you can't see behind? All of those factors have to be considered when crafting a defense. I mean, everybody who is charged with a criminal offense is entitled in law in the Constitution to a defense, and a proper defense at that. But certainly the court has to take into consideration all of the factors. But one of the important factors in the case that you've raised to be distinguished against what may happen in Trinidad is the cultural orientation of society. What is likely to occur in the United States may not be likely to occur in Trinidad. And I'll take it to some figures here. In 1776, the United States became the United States by way of Declaration of Independence. And the Second Amendment to the Constitution was introduced in 1791. That's 15 years after independence. The citizens of the United States were given the right to bear arms. 15 years after independence. 214 years later, in 2005, was the first time any state enacted legislation on stand your ground. So it took them 214 years of being able by right to own a firearm to then introduce stand your ground legislation, telling people they do have a duty to retreat and establishing certain criteria the court must look at when examining what is reasonable and what is proportionate. So that's why I'm saying that the cultural orientation of society is very important. Because we look at a society that has been independent for 63 years as compared to that, where we do not have a right to own a firearm. It is a different situation. And you really have to examine all of the circumstances in order to be able to almost accurately postulate a potential outcome in the criminal courts. But what I will say, though, in closing, before I hand over to the Senator, is that right now, the law is what it is, in that if you hold the honest belief as a firearm user's license holder, that you are in imminent threat, you are allowed to defend yourself. But that defense has to be, as I said, reasonable, and it has to be proportionate. And so one must ask yourself whether it is reasonable and proportionate to act in the manner in which that gentleman did. And if you're asking yourself that, I think the answer might very well be the same as that outcome.
Senator?
Sure. Mr. Budu raised the points of the culture and context of Trinidad and Tobago, and it seems that this law is now being discussed along with firearm, the increase in firearm usage, the acquisition of firearms by everybody. Everybody is now saying when this law in place, they feel that now they have a right to go and apply and get a firearm. So what I think is critical with this discussion with stand your ground and firearm usage is education. Educating the populace on firearm usage, the correct way to do it, how to go about it, and just we need to have a cultural shift in our country to understand the responsibility of a firearm user. It's not just I have a gun and I could shoot and do whatever. What are your responsibilities? How do you use it in public? How do you carry it? How do you keep it safe at home? So I think education, we need to go on, the government, society needs to go on a whole educational drive before we enact any of these laws that would arm the populace. Otherwise, we're looking at a wild, wild west out here.
Thank you, Senator. And Sule?
I mean, I will turn as a pseudo lawyer. I just feeling like a lot because I'm around lawyers so much, right? as an armchair lawyer, as far as I read in this bill does not make any specific reference to a firearm. Stand your ground don't mean a fire. So you could literally stand your ground with your fist, or a cutlass, or just knives in your kitchen, or ninja stars. I don't know, but you could stand your ground with literally anything. It does not make specific reference to a firearm. So while we have this rhetoric and people keep thinking, yes, you know, firearms and firearms and firearms, that's why I'm saying there's a disconnect between what is being said on the platform and what is actually here. This doesn't make it any easier for you to go and get a firearm. And it doesn't make a mention of a firearm. It just says you could stand your ground, basically, essentially, yeah? No, okay.
Thank you.
All right, good. So I give my LLB there. Yeah.
Thank you, Sule. And ladies and gentlemen, indeed, we have a very packed community center here today in Arima, and I think this may be one of our largest crowds for us, and persons are still coming in. So I know we have a very interesting night. But before I move forward, allow me to recognize the Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, the Honorable Hans Devines, here with us. And also allow me to recognize the party's Assistant General Secretary, Ms. Patricia Alexis, here with us tonight as well. So indeed, we do have a very packed Arima Community Center here this evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we continue our consultation.
Good evening, everyone. Christian BDC from the greatest constituency, San Fernando East. So I just want to shift the thinking a little bit because it's something that has been on my mind right now. In the current climate of how our homes are set up in Trinidad, single families are a big thing. Single mothers, single fathers, that's a big thing. You would have single parents with children and minors at that, right? Meaning that they're under 18 and they have firearms in their homes. Let's just say the child is 16, 17, somewhere around there of mature age where they know this is a gun. If somebody comes into my mommy's home, I could empty the whole clip and, right? What is going to happen if worst case scenario, something like that happens and a child know where mommy have the gun, goes to pick up the gun and shoots the intruder? What is not going to happen to that child? Because I remember very vividly Senior Counsel Lala saying that let's just say you in a situation like that, whoever discharges the firearm or uses whatever weapon it is to defend themselves, they're going to have to go through that process of going to the police station, awaiting a trial and all of those things. What is going to happen? Because our laws are very different for minors and people over 18. So some food for thought and a perspective that we may not or we may have missed so far.
Thank you. Sanjeev?
Mike man, 1, 2, right. Okay, well, first of all, so the firearms, as Sule just rightfully pointed out, this particular bill does nothing to the Firearms Act. It doesn't address the acquisition of firearms. It doesn't increase anybody's right to bear an arm, anything like that, right? So that we are to assume that this is going to be introduced into the Parliament without any amendment to the Firearms Act, and so the law that currently is in place will remain in place, and that is that nobody over 25 lawfully should have a firearm, right? It's against the law. You can't apply for a firearm unless you turn age at 25. and nobody under 25, all right? So that means that anybody operating, handling a legally issued firearm under the age of 25 is doing so without a firearm user's license and therefore is operating outside of the law. Now that also puts the owner of the firearm in a funny position as well, all right? Because they too have now found themselves in breach of the law. So that's the first thing. However, the law as it is, the common law as it is, again, recognizes that self-defense occurs in various circumstances and situations. And so, if it is that an honest belief is held by even a minor that my life is in threat or mommy's life is in threat, and there is no choice but to get mommy's gun, she's been injured, for example, get mommy's gun, she taught me how to operate it safely for the same reason, and you operated it safely and discharged a reasonable and proportionate number of rounds in the direction of the intruder, and that intruder happens to be wounded or killed. That is a good self-defense. I can't see a jury convicting. In fact, I wouldn't venture into the prosecutorial realm here, but it might very well be the case that after the police investigation is concluded, that the DPP may not advise a charge to be laid. No, of course, there may be an investigation as to the circumstances under which the minor got hold of the firearm, which is a different offense altogether. If it is the firearm was left unattended, unsafe, and that sort of thing, and therefore fell into the air. But certainly if mommy was in the line of fire, was operating the firearm in defense of the home, and the child got hold of it in that circumstance, certainly a proper self-defense will be established if a charge is laid. But you have the introduction of the bill now, and we've heard from certain members of the government that the police not going to investigate. But the police not going to investigate, it therefore means that the criteria that we've gone through in this legislation that the court has to consider will be considered by the court, and it therefore tells you that chances are a charge has to be laid if this piece of legislation is introduced. So that is the shift in the that comes about with the introduction of the legislation. Thank you.
Yeah,
Sule. Say something quickly. All right. The word trauma is bandied about a lot, right? But I want to give a very simple definition. Trauma is too much, too soon for your brain or body to handle, or too little over a long period of time. Simple. Too much, too soon. And I want you to hold on to that and think about a child opening up a firearm and emptying the clip, right, on somebody, and then taking their life. Whether that person is an intruder, not an intruder, whether it was a deliberate action or not. A child, a minor. That is too much, too soon. And therefore, that is most likely a traumatic act for a child to have to go through. Those things, while we're having the conversations very clearly about standing your ground and doing what and what and what and what, I want to reiterate again. We're not making provisions for things like these. That is a significant consideration because what trauma does is it changes how your brain functions. This child might never be the same again after such an act. But now feels empowered to do it because you could stand your ground. You could open it, you could load up the matic and empty the clip. Which is the rhetoric which is being shared. And that's things like that. Those are my concerns. Yeah.
Sule, and we move ahead, fast and furious.
Yes, it will be fast and furious. Milan Garcia, Arima. I think I can make a contribution here as a firearms instructor myself. My training used to be a little different to people. I told my students, when you acquire a firearm, you just got a license to take 2 slaps. Because you must be you must be confident. You know what you have. It takes just a matter of ounces of trigger pressure. You know you have that. It's the last thing to go for. You must have that control. That is the training. When we speak about America, almost every state in America is a different gun law. So it's not one size fits all. You go to Texas, you can have how many and walk with it exposed. There are some, it must be in the glove compartment. Some you can only carry it in your trunk or your boot, as some of them would say. So all the different states are different laws. But we take it carte blanche in Trinidad. Everybody want a gun. And I just detest hearing this empty the clip nonsense. It just does not make sense. There's an incident, and I looked it over even this afternoon before coming here, where a police officer, I think it was in Shagwana, and a Arima boy also, if he had only taken 3 seconds longer, he would have been alive. 3 seconds. But he went too fast for his firearm. And the guy who came in with the firearm took him out. Timing was bad. That goes with training. This law, I mean, to me, it gives the police the story. You know, they have one story. And the civilian, you just cannot use that same story. We were pursuing the suspect. It appeared he pulled something resembling that of a firearm. We feared for our life. And in keeping with the use of force policy, we returned fire. And well, he was a casualty. We know, I think everybody knows that story. They get away with it. But you as a civilian, you cannot use that story. So it is important when it comes to firearms to be properly trained, understand what you have, understand that it is more difficult to mind than a baby. It is more difficult to mind than a baby. So we got to be careful. And even I told someone, even this thing about having police officers in schools with firearms, that is a remedy for chaos. If an intruder comes into the school for whatever reason and the police fires, there is no telling where the projectile will end. I have seen all kinds of people, including police officers, miss a target from 10 yards. So if something happens in the school and you fire, you do not know where that projectile will end. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and we appreciate you bringing your expertise and impacting the comments and the conversation. Sanjeev?
Thank you. Mr. Garcia has opened the door for a different type of conversation, but it shows that the entire society has become engulfed in a conversation on firearms because of this bill, whereas this bill says nothing about firearms, and it is all to do with the messaging surrounding this bill and the narrative that has been put out there with this bill. And if it is that the narrative is about making firearm ownership more accessible to the population, and why not propose legislation that addresses the Firearms Act? For example, why not put in place a proper transparent criteria so that every applicant who meets the criteria knows that they have a fair and transparent opportunity to own a firearm based on a process that is applicable across the board, rather than the arbitrariness that currently exists in the firearm procedure. And the thing about the last administration was undergoing an audit of the Firearms Department for the very purpose of considering how that process can be made more transparent, more efficient, and more accessible to those who think they are in need of a firearm. So that at least if somebody were to apply, they know within 3 months' time or 6 months' time, you get a yes, you get a no. If you get a no, why you get the no? You go to your appeal, and you have a transparent process. Not that you have 20 years and 30 years people waiting for firearms. So that it begs the question again, why has this bill come with this type of firearm-based messaging when nothing has been brought to the parliament or proposed to be brought to the parliament to address the issue of firearms altogether?
Thank you, Sanjeev. Any other comments on this? Sir, name and location.
My name is Andre L. Akers, and I am from Takrigua. Great evening, Madam Opposition Leader, members of Parliament, members on the panel, the moderator, and members of the audience. In 1993, a gentleman by the name Douglas North was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in his ability to take history in a general form and apply it to economics to explain why some societies flourish while others stagnate like Trinidad and Tobago. Basically, what he is saying is that when a country has weak institutions, what happens over time is that individuals with vested interests will infiltrate the system and corrupt the institutions. He defined institutions as being incentive mechanisms, either to reward or punish human behavior and thus set human behavior into a particular trajectory. North stated that when these institutions are corrupt, it then corrupts the quality of the society, and the corrupt quality of the society further corrupts the institutions in the society, and thus the institution, the country is in a vicious cycle which is very difficult to escape from and which we are in right now. Now, one would say that this is highly theoretical, and I beg to differ. In 1983, the then Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, George Chambers, had a secret commission inquiry into the extent of the drug trade in Trinidad and Tobago. And that report found that the drugs were coming from Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia, and that it was having major societal problems, which we are still reeling from today. It alleged in the report that in each police division there were corrupt police officers which facilitated the drug trade, and also it alleged other government officials that facilitated the drug trade. Nothing came out of that, but because I'm limited, because of time, I cannot go into it. But in 1988, a bittersweet moment took place for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. A person on the bench was jailed for 2 years for receiving $440,000 on the 30th of July 1986, and a car PAU 3465 on the 9th of December 1986. Now, one would think after 40 odd years, the system will be self-correcting, and we will be able to purge these individuals from the institutions and purge these individuals from the society. And I beg to differ. And I'm reporting to a report from the United States 2022 Trafficking in Persons Report, Trinidad and Tobago. The country's oversight borders and outside observers consistently allege that law enforcement and security officials continue to be complicit in trafficking. A study found by a foreign organization and foreign company reported that 10% of the police officers were under active investigation. We have roughly 6,000 police officers, so it means roughly 600 police officers in Trinidad and Tobago being investigated. And finally, it alleged complicit Coast Guard officials facilitated the entry of women, complicit immigration and custom officers ensured women and children arrived safely and received. This is from the US Embassy. And let me put the icing on the cake for everybody here. You, the panel, saying that this law being presented is being vague and ambiguous, and it needs the court's interpretation to proceed forward. So my humble view is that instead of we dealing with the symptoms of the society, why not shift our attention to the root causes of the society, and we could get back to our Trinidad and Tobago as described by Nappy Myers. Thank you, and you all have a blessed evening.
Thank you, sir.
So I would agree with you that, yes, that we need to address the root causes of some of the issues that would precipitate things like home invasion. And in that regard, I would also like to commend the PNM administration, the last government, for all the things that they were putting in place to address the very root causes of crime in this country. For example, what was being done in the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, all the programs that were implemented there. Those were the type of things that the last government was putting in place to attract the youth, to assist the youth to go away from a life of crime and not do things like invading other people's homes. I'd like to again congratulate our former Minister of Education who's here with us for all the initiatives that were launched in schools that did not require us to put armed police officers there. So I agree with you that we do need to address and continue to address the root causes of crime.
Sule?
Asking for is a socio-economic shift, right? So what you're asking for is a cultural shift that will impact upon the society and the economic functioning of Trinidad and Tobago, right? As for the economic functioning, let me check you back Monday after budget now, right? I think it's Monday, I'm not sure yet. So I'll check you back Monday after budget to have that conversation. But as for the cultural and the social aspect of it, we have been rapidly, as a society, adopting this bill is not even a shock to me because we have, even before this, been rapidly adopting aspects of westernized culture without giving thought to how it impacts our culture in Trinidad and Tobago. We have been dropping things that have worked for us for eons, right? We've let go of those things and we've adopted what America and other European countries and so on are doing without giving thought to how adopting some of these things, these cultures wholesale, will impact our culture. We've been doing it, right? We've been shifting away from enjoying maybe even some of our own, something as simple as some of the local things that we produce here, right? In favor of foreign. So foreign thing is better than local thing is the perception, right? And so when we start there, you're asking us to somehow revert to the old time days, as I heard somebody mention previously, when we've already, the horse has bolted, right? So what we probably need to do is to start having conversations about how do we find ways to move forward in a modernized society without letting go of the values that get us to where we got to. So we don't have to be afraid of becoming a new society and changing and evolving and AI and all of that, you know. But we have to hold on to what worked. What was the values that got you here? You stood up and you spoke eloquently. And I'm sure it's because you probably had a parent who was on your back or somebody who was on your back who say, you know what I mean, they will not suffer you to be some mumbling buffoon or something like that, right? They would have encouraged you and instilled certain values. So those values, I think, those values are what we have to keep pushing. And the value can be empty the clip on them. That's a different kind of value you're trying to introduce. Yeah? We have to hold on to what the values that have worked for us.
I'll allow a very brief comment again.
Sure, no problem. You are indeed right. Sometimes when I was younger, I would answer back to my mother. And she would launch the blue soap, and the blue soap somehow always turn corners. But nonetheless, let me get back on the serious note. What I'm simply saying is that with respect to the crime debate, we are having a tunnel vision with respect to, not you, the entirety, we are having a tunnel vision with respect to things. And I think it's been an injustice for the population because what is required is a wide view. And when you have a wide bird's eye view of the problem, the population, they will understand the nature and significance of the problem and thus shift either the opposition, the government, or whoever it be in power to do the correct thing for the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, thank you, sir. And before sure, Sanjeev.
I mean, so Mr. Ika, I just want to compliment you as well. You've rightfully identified that root causes must be addressed. And over the last 10 years, you would have heard this phrase all the time. All of government approach that was the approach to crime. So that when you have economic instability and unemployment in a society, you have lack of legitimate employment, which causes an increase for incentives for illegal gain. High youth unemployment is related to increased assaults, robberies, gang attraction, and crimes of opportunity. And I have it written down here because this was on a research paper I read this morning. So when you have 40,000 people losing their jobs, but you want to introduce legislation which ostensibly has been messaged to communicate that we're going to shoot our way out of crime, it simply cannot work. So I'm happy that you've rightfully recognized root causes is where it is. We cannot have societal disorganization and pretend that this bill is going to be a panacea, as the chairman always says, for crime. It's not going to be.
Thank you, Sanjeev. And before we take the question that's coming there, please allow me to recognize His Worship, the Mayor of Arima, His Worship Baliram Maharaj. I know I saw him. Thank you for hosting us here in Arima, Mayor, and certainly a very warm welcome that we've had. The next question, sir.
Good night. All protocols observed. My name is Roger Waldron. I hail from the constituency where the MP says, shoot them when they run. With that said, I was listening to a calypso from 1984, which stated, we living in jail. And if you listen to that calypso from Penguin, Selwyn Joseph, it will seem that it was last week he wrote that calypso because it is very present at today's environment. People are living in fear, crime is high, and the now government has manipulated the minds and the thinking of persons along those lines. A bill for fear and for watching your neighbor differently. And it is a dangerous practice. And one of the questions I have is that why the need for a 3/5 majority to pass legislation to protect the citizens of the country? And why I'm asking that is because previously when the PNM was in power and bills came to the parliament, they say they're only supporting good legislation. But this bill that is being presented now, in wherever jurisdiction in the world that you look up and try to get information on this bill, there is none saying that this is a good bill. None wherever in the world. It's not just not liking, none whatsoever I have seen shows that the bill it brings benefit, reduction in home invasions or reduction in crime. Everything is on the opposite. And I think that you would have mentioned those things before. My greatest concern is that they have the majority to pass the bill in Parliament, which shows me that they have 27 members, 2 rubber stamps, and then we have the 13 opposition members. And I didn't count wrong. They have 27. We have somebody sitting on the up high, who have been convicted of corruption. I don't know how that person ends up there. That's one of my biggest things after the election. Corruption, running from the law, serving time. However, on technicalities, I'm not a lawyer. Got away with it. And that brings me to local things now. Because one of the now MPs sitting in the Tobago House had a confrontation being in a man's house and was asked to immediately remove himself according to the bill, and he had a problem. What happens now if that bill comes in place? Trouble for politicians.
Yeah, sir.
Right?
I would ask you if you could
deliver
the question.
The 3/5 majority is one of the questions that I have. Why the need for the 3/5 majority to pass the bill when things could always already be done? Hold on, because I understand your time limit, and please allow me.
Sure, we allow a little space.
Right. The other thing that I was going to address is that we forget how to deal with certain things. One of my concerns is that when a home invader comes into your house, he comes with a particular intention, and not he, them. So when you're telling a man no room to retreat, you pushing a man to a certain depth when 4 or 5 of them coming with firearm. You ain't have nothing in your house. You might have a cutlass, you might have a knife. And you telling me no duty to retreat. That puts my life in instant danger. Because the mind of the criminal, they're coming for you to take what you have. Also, what comes up in this whole scenario is the response of the police. I'm not talking to policemen, but you understand this. You have an incident, and what is the response time for a police in any kind of situation? Half hour, 45 minutes, if some of them come at all. And this does not augur well for catching the perpetrators, because the solve rate for these crimes are very low, very, very low. So all of these things we need to take into perspective when we want to support something that was built and pushed on us, imposed on us, in just a fear. Is a bill built on fear and hatred, because there are lots of different aspects of.
Yeah, sir. But sorry to cut you over. I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much.
So I will respond to your question on the 3/5. Why is a 3/5 majority required in both houses? Well, it's actually stated very clearly on the bill. It's required because the bill is inconsistent with our rights and freedoms as enshrined in Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution. And when that happens, the majority or the number of people required goes up. Now, you said that they have a majority, so it will go through. They have a majority in the lower house. They still require 3/5 in the upper house. And because of that, they will need to get the support of, well, either somebody in the opposition or at least three of the independent senators for this bill to pass. So all is not lost for someone like you who is not in favor of this bill. They can be convinced.
Thank you, Senator. And ladies and gentlemen, given the time, we may have space for one more question, but if not, yeah? Okay, so if not, I will ask that members of the panel, in fact, what we could do is close off with an online question. Let me just see. So I will look to take a question that would have come from someone who may have sent it in virtually. So I'm going to ask a question, and it comes from Ernest, and he's asking, is this legislation really needed? Wouldn't it be better to improve the current suite of legislation and all of the crimes which are likely to be committed under home invasion? So that will be the last question for tonight. And in doing so, I will ask the panel to give your closing remarks.
Thanks, Viash. Thanks to Ernest for the question. I mean, I come back to the fever and the medicine. What is the fever we have for which this bill is the medicine? When has anybody heard of a time that somebody broke into your home, the police came and arrested them, and then said, I don't know what to charge this person with. That has never happened. And that tells you that if somebody invades your home, there is a charge already for it. In fact, there are several charges that could arise as a result of somebody breaking into your home. So that the creation of a home invasion as an offense, there's no need for it. It already exists. And certainly, amendments can be made to the relevant legislation to increase the fines or the penalties, say you have a mandatory jail sentence. All of that could be done by way of amendments to the current legislation. And in regards, stand your ground, as we've already established, there is the Castle Doctrine, the case law, the common law, provides for a proper defense already in law. So that in my view, I mean, I'm not certain what is the issue that this legislation is attempting to cure. That's my... am I taking my closing remarks now?
Yeah. I would say take it at this point in time too.
Sure.
Yeah, and we'll go around with the other
so
panels.
this is the fourth consultation, and this evening I said I'm gonna close on solutions. Rather, I mean, we've gone through the legislation and one of that. Sure, okay. I'll give way to that.
Okay. Senator.
Yes, because I feel when you're going to say solutions, you might touch on something I wanted to say in response to that question. So the question was, why the need for the law? Can we not just tighten up the other laws that exist? And I agree with Mr. Budu. We can address the other laws. But in addition to that, what I think is critical, people feel unsafe. This law here is supposed to arm you with a way to protect yourself. But is that what you really want to do? Do you want to be the one to have to get a gun and protect yourself? Or you would rather that the police, whose job it is, who are trained to do that, would be able to do that? So I think in addition to just the laws, what we really need to do is to continue to support our police officers so that they can do their jobs efficiently. Give them the tools. They don't have vehicles, continue to give them the vehicles, give them the trade and the response time. So it's not that I want to, God forbid, have to look for a matic to defend myself when someone comes in, God forbid. What I want is if God forbid that happens, the police come. They come in a timely manner. They get the person, and that the person is prosecuted in a timely manner. Because again, one of the issues that we've been having is how long it takes for justice to be served in this country. And I think that's what gives some of these criminals give them the sense of impunity. When will they be dealt with? When will they have their day in court? So I think we need to address the other institutions, the police, our courts, and I think that would assist the citizens, and I think that would be much more welcome than telling you to go out there and defend yourself.
Thank you, Senator. I'll ask Sule to bring some closing remarks, and Sanjeev, you will wrap it up.
All right. In closing, I'll introduce one more thing that I wanted to cover, which is the idea that having a firearm will provide you with what we call a false sense of security. Having a firearm might actually make you a target. Think about it. You have something that a bandit will want. Are you going to load your matic and empty it while you're sleeping? What is supposed to happen is that you're supposed to have a safe place, a safe or whatever, where you're secure and you store it and so on. Is that safe going to be on your back at all times because you're home? So I'm saying to you that can create a false sense of security, what we call in psychology a Superman syndrome, that you feel you're untouchable. You might find yourself in situations and scenarios hoping that somebody touch a button, right? Because you have a firearm. And when you actually end up in a situation, it is totally not what you're expecting. And you can handle it wrong, and it can cost lives. And not the lives that you are hoping or not hoping, right? So there's that. The other issue for me is that it speaks to, and the clamoring for it speaks to, a lack of trust in our institutions. It means that we do not trust the systems that we have in place to secure us. And we instead need to secure ourselves. What we need to do, as the person would have asked in the question, I think, I would be very much for, as my panelists also alluded to, addressing these systems and organizations that failing the trust of the people. We need to rebuild that trust. To me, I can't speak for everybody, but for me as a citizen, what I expect of my government or the persons who are governing me is to help build that trust in the institutions, those institutions. I want them working for me. And so I think that is what we need to address. And I'm certain, I don't want to speak on behalf of the opposition here, but I'm certain, based on what the opposition leader would have said in her opening remarks, that the opposition is willing to work along with the government for any legislation, any good legislation, that is to the betterment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. As one of the persons pointed out when they spoke, they said, listen, this is not a one legislation fix. We're looking at it from a very narrow and myopic perspective, and perhaps we have to take it from a broader scope. And in doing that, we might find we may not need to do this. We may not need to have stand your ground, because if we start addressing it from other scopes, we're addressing it in schools, we're addressing it with youth, we're changing the culture, we're doing the hard things first. This is the easy part, no? To get a firearm and stand up and shoot somebody, that's the easy part, believe it or not. The hard part is actually going and addressing the actual root causes of the issue. Right? When persons come to me for therapy, I usually say we address the root of the tree and not the fruit. If you have a rotten mango, picking the rotten mango don't fix the problem. We address the root of the tree so that we can fix the fruit. To me, when we're looking at this legislation is the fruit. And if we move forward, we're picking the fruit people, we're not addressing the root. And I'll close on that.
Thank you, Sule. And final closing remarks by Sanjeev for the panel.
It seems that we have all shared the same view, that we are solution-based in wrapping up. So I would just go by point form. Social interventions in areas of high priority, such as vocational training, support for single-parent homes, flexible and sustainable employment. And why I say flexible? There are people who are at risk, more at risk than others, young people, of becoming part and parcel of criminality in Trinidad, just because of circumstance. And it is programs like CPEP that allow single parents an opportunity to do three things: to earn a decent living, to learn and be trained and retool themselves or educate themselves, and number three, to supervise their children when those children come home from school. When we have a weak rule of law and the exposure to corruption in society, when the state cannot impartially support the delivery of justice, it sends a message of criminality to society. And an example of that is what I said earlier, by permitting a cabinet member to continue to sit who has a criminal charge to answer. When we have political instability and conflict exposure, which is exemplified by the government's messaging, normalizing violent behavior by using violent language frequently in the media. These things send the wrong signals. And so in respect of practical amendments or developments in law, I would suggest that creating a linkage between, or information linkage between the magistracy and the High Court, and specifically the family jurisdiction and the criminal jurisdiction, for issues where you have somebody charged with a criminal offense who is entitled to make an application for bail, but might have a domestic violence matter, or 2 or 3 or 8 in the family court, but that information doesn't get to the criminal magistrate. That is a relevant piece of information there, because we have to consider implementing or maintaining the existing and buttressing the existing safeguards in the bail process for people who might pose unusual risks of violence in society. And the last thing I would suggest, and I don't know if Sule might agree with me on this, but I have observed that there might be a real need for mental health assessments for some accused persons who are before the criminal courts, who display a lack of understanding or a certain level of impunity or impartiality to the fact that they are involved as an accused in the criminal justice system. So I'll close on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. And ladies and gentlemen, can you, as we close off here and as we end this panel discussion and we bring this evening's national consultation on stand your ground legislation hosted by the People's National Movement, can you all please give a resounding round of applause for our panelists? And ladies and gentlemen, you all here in Arima have been such a very engaging, insightful, and I would say diligent crowd. And can you all please give yourselves a round of applause? Your questions and your comments has certainly informed, and I could tell you, and I've been here and I've been watching the political leader out of the corner of my eye, and every single consultation she has been taking very diligent notes. I've seen her notebook grow thicker and thicker with every consultation. So I know the insights, the comments, it's being taken up on board, and certainly what you bring to the table here in these consultations will inform our parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, and the position. So before we end, I would like to invite to the podium to bring closing remarks a neighbor to Arima, a financial expert, a highly qualified and experienced one at that. In 2025, just a few months ago, he was elected as a member of parliament and has distinguished himself as a well-researched and impactful debater. He now dedicates his efforts in his constituency as well towards community and human development. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to bring closing remarks here in Arima, the Member of Parliament for Malabar Mausika, the Honorable Dominic Romaine.
Thank you so much, Vyash. And good evening to all present. All protocols having been observed. The last 5 months, if they've taught us anything, is that elections have consequences. And I will add a caveat to that: election promises also have consequences. And let's just look at what some of the things that have just happened in the last 5 months. The most prominent being almost 50,000 persons have lost their jobs. Some of the most economically vulnerable citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. As a member of parliament, elected member of parliament, every week I see constituents. Every week I have former CPEP workers, URP workers, forestry workers who come to me, some of them in tears, because they're unable to pay their bills. Some of them, they've received notices from the landlord, so they're about to be evicted. They're looking for food support. Some of them are unable to send their children to school. And why are we here? We are here because of election promises. And it has been our experience in the parliament chamber that this government loves to pat itself on the back and say, promises made, promises kept, promises delivered, without regard or consideration for the consequences of those promises. We are here tonight because of one of those promises. Load up the matic, pull it back, knock it on them, and knock it again. We all know who said that. And it was repeated night after night after night. Light them up, empty the clip, reload, empty it again. Look at the turnout here tonight. And if we've been following the consultations that have been held not just by the PNM but by the government as well, we would see the turnout. People are genuinely interested in this legislation. They have legitimate questions, they have legitimate concerns that they want the answers to. And that is why they turn out. And they ask these questions because they're looking for answers. Because nobody wants to make jail innocently. But when we have legislation that is proposed by the government, and even members of the government in their own consultations are unable to answer questions that are posed by members of the public, questions or concerns that they did not even consider to put in the legislation. So the very first consultation that they had, a prison officer posed a question to the Minister of Legal Affairs, now the Minister of Land and Legal Affairs, Saddam Hussein. And the question was, if a home invasion takes place at a home where you have a licensed firearm, but somebody who does not have the license uses that firearm and shoots the intruder, what is their situation? He could not answer. His response was, it is a legitimate concern and he will have to take it back to the Attorney General for discussion. It tells me that the answer is not in the legislation. But they plan to come very soon to the parliament to ram this legislation down your throats. They have the numbers. Elections have consequences. They have a majority. And as the Prime Minister would have told us, I think in one of the earlier debates, we have the numbers. We will pass the legislation with or without your support. And we don't need your support. That is what she told us. Plain face. With no regard and no care. And so, there are concerns with this legislation. My colleague, Senator John Bates, raised the issue of education. One of the questions that is most prominent is Trinidad and Tobago ready for this legislation? There's a saying, as with all things well-intentioned, abuse is inevitable. And this legislation is going to present abuse, especially when people don't understand how the law is supposed to work. There is a lack of clarity on what you can and cannot do. Why is it that every time the conversation about stand your ground comes up, there is always mention of firearms, always mention guns, because of how this legislation was sold to the population? And what the government, now then opposition, would have done, would have created in the minds of the citizens this hatred, this abhorrence for home invaders. So that should you become the victim of a home invasion, there can only be one outcome, one result. The home invader, well, rather somebody has to live in a body bag. Ideally, they would like it to be the home invader. But it may very well end up being the homeowner. Because while you might have a 9mm, a Glock, a 38, they come in with AR-15s. And it's you versus 3, maybe 4 of them. I am so sure many of us have seen videos on Facebook with some of these gun activities taking place, and you see the kind of heavy artillery that these men carry in. You really think people could come up against that? In my own constituency of Malabar Mausika, I have a significant number of senior citizens. And I recently had a conversation with a couple of them, and they've expressed concerns to me that they believe that this law, once passed, can make them soft targets. Because if the perpetrators of home invasions are of the view or the belief that in the able-bodied homes you have firearms, they're more likely to target the homes where you have senior citizens who can't defend themselves. And in my constituency, where you have a lot of homes where you have husband and wife who are retirees, and as one gentleman told me, he said, I could barely stand up, far less to stand ground. And he said, if I have a firearm, the time it would take me with my walker to go and get a gun, they put some licks on me and throw me in a corner. Which is a fact. And so they're going to be targeting these people because they know even if they have firearms, they may not be able to defend themselves. Let's just look at what happened a couple of years ago. The owners of Passad, the Food King, the matriarch and patriarch were the victims of a home invasion. They had walls. Let's quote in the member for Tunapuna. They had walls, gates, cameras. I don't know if they had, what the Prime Minister said, a panic button. I don't know if they had dogs. But you know what they had? Guns. Not 1, 2. And they were relieved of those guns. So having firearms does not necessarily protect you, especially if you're not in a position to be able to use it. But this government is intent on pushing through this law because it was a promise made. It was one of the promises that was able to get them votes. They mounted the back of that tiger. They rode it into office. And now, trying to dismount and finding it to be very difficult. When last have you heard Mrs. Passad Bissessa say, load up the matic? When last have you heard her say, empty the clip? We heard her say recently, kill them violently. But this has always been her rhetoric. I recall in 2015 when she was commissioning the Piarco police station. In her speech, she said to the police officers, release the dogs of war, give no quarter. You know what that means? Show no mercy. So when she's giving that advice to the general public, and you find yourself the victim of a home invasion, and you take the advice of the Minister of Justice to shoot somebody in the back, or to empty the clip, so you shoot the perpetrator, he is maimed, and you decide you're so angry, and all you're hearing is, load up the matic, light them up, empty the clip. Well, if the Prime Minister says to do that, I go in and do that. When the police come, it's you are the answer, not the Prime Minister. The man who they recently announced is going to be the head of the National Operations Center, retired police officer Johnny Abraham. When he was speaking at one of their crime talks during the election campaign, I recall him saying, if they come into your house, do what you have to do, but just know what to tell the police. Just know what to tell the police. Right? So if you would have defended yourself lawfully, why you need to know what to tell the police? Tell the police what happened. But he is offering, don't worry, I have defended people in the past and I tell them what to tell the police. He referenced a situation where there was a home invasion. There were 6 men, the police killed 1 and they held 5. You know what he said? What difference would it have made with the next 5? Well, they didn't kill the next 5. So when it is that we have senior persons such as this advocating what may appear to be vigilantism, extrajudicial killings, what do you leave for the average citizen who is not likely to say, well, let me grab a cold beer and a copy of this legislation and sit down and take a read. Or let me grab a slice of cake and a glass of juice and read this legislation. Even if they were inclined to do so, the language of the law can be very difficult for the average citizen to understand. And I am certain when that legislation comes to the Parliament, if we were to invite members of the public to sit down in that public gallery, and we had a session of consultation on the floor, and we open it up for questions, half the members of the government wouldn't be able to answer the questions. But they come in there prepared to vote yes. What are they voting yes to? They don't know. But they just know promise made, promise kept, promise delivered, and they have to do that. Permit me to just quote something from the Jamaica Gleaner. I just added it. Yes. Trinidad and Tobago's new government should be extremely cautious in proceeding with its plan for stand-your-ground self-defense law, lest it unleashes grave and unintended consequences. Indeed, this newspaper suggests to Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar that she drop the idea which, when first broached, we assumed to be mere windy campaign febrility and get on with the tough and complex grind of finding solutions to her country's serious problems of crime, especially homicides. This is the Jamaica Gleaner telling her that. But just look at what is happening with the nation's schools. Why do we need to put police officers in the schools? Who was it that, as Minister of Education, removed corporal punishment? Many of us here grew up, get good cocktail. I get licks, and we're all the better for it. But they made it out to be something bad. And so today, we're in the situation where we find ourselves. Violence in the schools, and we have to put police officers, and we have the Minister of Homeland Security telling us, let us now try 13-year-olds as adults when they commit crimes. They're not dealing with the root cause and why it is these young people are acting up the way that they do. But I can tell you, as members of Parliament elected every week when we sit with their parents, we understand why some of them are in the situation that they are. So I'm just throwing out these few thoughts for you all as we proceed. And eventually, when this legislation comes, these are some of the considerations that we will take into account when we speak on the floor in the Parliament and eventually when we take the vote. So I just want to thank all of you all for coming out here tonight. Continue to participate in the politics and the governance of your country. And 2030 or before soon come. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Parliament Dominic Romain. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out to today's national consultation on Stand Your Ground legislation hosted by the People's National Movement. We thank the party leadership for having the vision and the foresight to organize such an event which we are going across the country with. And we ask you all to stay tuned as we have our next consultation very soon. We thank the panelists, we thank those who organized it, and most of all, we thank you, the audience here, and those viewing and listening live. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and this concludes our consultation. We do wish you safe travels home.